Aloha, and welcome to the Window Gallery for Invented Instruments Virtual Artist Talk Series. I'm David Samus, and I curate this space alongside Bart Hopkin and Kirk Pearson. As a result of San Francisco's shelter-in-place order, the Window Gallery is not currently holding physical exhibitions at our landmark space at the Center for New Music in the heart of San Francisco's Tenderloin. But today we're happy to bring you a conversation between John Raskin and Cheryl Leonard. John Raskin is a saxophonist with Rova Quartet and a composer of many compelling graphic scores. And Cheryl Leonard is an instrument inventor, composer, and wilderness explorer. They'll be talking about Cheryl Leonard's exhibition, Lexicographies, a show of graphic scores currently on exhibit at 55 Taylor Street, where it can be seen through the window. While the center remains closed to the public, we are still serving the community through grant opportunities and artist assistance. So please reach out if you need help as a musician or a sound artist. Our staff is available by phone or email. You can find out more about Cheryl Leonard and purchase her music or her fantastic collections of Arctic field recordings at alwaysnorth.com. Always, ALLWAYS, north.com. Stay safe and well, and we look forward to sharing more new instruments with you in November, when Other Minds artists Fred Frith and Sudu Tuari will be mounting a new virtual exhibition. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm John Raskin. I'm going to be interviewing Cheryl Leonard. And I'm just a little bit about myself. I'm the main focus of my music has been the Rova Saxophone Quartet, I've been doing graphic scores almost 25 years now. So I'm really excited to be able to have this discussion about lexicographies with Cheryl. And why don't you say something about yourself, Cheryl?
Hi, it's great to be here and talk about graphic scores with you, because I'm a fan of your work as well. I'm a composer and an improviser and musician, instrument builder, all kinds of things. I've been called a performance artist. And I've recently been doing this calligraphy graphic score project.
I think a good place to start, if you don't mind, is to show some of your instruments, because I think of you as a sculptor and a visual artist as much as any of the other descriptions that you applied to yourself, and I think you kind of occupy a very interesting nexus between the visual arts, the sound arts, and integrating the natural world into your work. So why don't you show us some of your stuff and comment on it a bit?
Yeah, and just before I do that, I think it's funny because our culture really encourages us to specialize on one thing.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of my favorite artists throughout time are people who have worked in multiple fields.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about Leonardo, who is a scientist and an artist, there's a value to looking at the world through multiple lenses and trying
Mm-hmm.
to see the connections between different ways of thinking about the world. So some of my instruments, let's see, share. So I've been making natural object instruments out of found materials from the natural world. Here are some Antarctic instruments that are made with penguin bones and driftwood. And what I'm interested in is the unique sounds that these materials can make. So I started building instruments really just as a practical consideration. I wanted to play, say, a shell, and it was really hard to hold it in one hand and try to bow it with a violin bow in the other hand. So I needed to mount it somehow, and then I didn't want it to look ugly. So they started to take these more sculptural forms. And this is the limpet shell spine, Antarctic limpet shells. It's one of my more sophisticated looking sculptural instruments. This is the back. This one's made with penguin vertebrae and dried kelp and driftwood. And I'm playing these in a lot of different ways, but often bowing, really like the sounds that we get with bowing. I used to play the viola a lot, so I still think of myself as a string player, although I'm mainly playing like bones and wood and rocks these days. Just give you a quick walkthrough. Some different shell. These are oyster shells. Each shell has at least 2 pitches, depending on where you bow it or tap it. So it has different resonances, strange overtones. Boa constrictor rib bones. These are fossilized cow ribs.
Wow.
This thing is called creature. Creature. This is dried bullwhip kelp. Vertebrae, again, fossilized bones. Marsh reeds. Another limpet shell. Kind of started with pine cones, right? So this is a more crude instrument, and then things got more evolved structurally. And these are amplified using different kinds of contact microphones usually, and sometimes open air condenser mics. So I can hear the very tiny sounds that they produce. Right, so here's bowing. Anyway, that's a quick overview of that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it sets up, your love of nature and this new direction that you went with the calligraphy. So you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so I was, let's go back here. I've been composing and making very composed pieces that use the natural object instruments, usually in combination with field recordings. And in order to play those, I made these graphic scores, which are more time-based, right? Like we have time across the top here, and then each horizontal line is an instrument or a field recording. So these are very specific, very composed. And what I want to do with these calligraphy things is have it be less dictated by me and more of an invitation to the performer to kind of discover something on their own, rather than me telling them exactly how to play everything. So should I talk about how I came up with the calligraphy?
Well, let's pause with between the kind of the narrative scores and this idea of this language score, which I find fascinating. Because you sent me the rabbit cloud language. So these are different sheets of the calligraphy, and
it looks like this.
Yes, they're beautiful.
Yeah. So this is just thinking about the individual characters, not trying to put them on the page in a specific order or anything.
Yeah. So, I was fascinated because it's a meditation for the performer, and yet it's a language so it's like each of us are deciding what this language is, which is kind of the difference between, oops, sorry.
We'll just edit that out.
It gets back. So you've done a free improvisation as well, right?
Yeah. So I do these really, really kind of almost diametrically opposed things, right? Like sort of very anal retentive composition where everything's quite defined and very practiced. And then more like free improvisation.
So in a way, this is kind of taking that practice and you finding scores for that approach.
It's much more improvisatory.
Right.
I'm imagining the interpretation of it as being much more improvisatory.
Right. So, one question I have is, do you have a sound in your ear about what's going to happen there, even though that the performers are kind of coming up with this, uh, their interpretation of the score?
You mean for the one piece I sent you?
Yeah,
The
for
Rabbit
rabbit
Cloud
cloud
language?
language. Yeah.
Well, that's the one that I sent you. It's called Terrain.
Oh, this is
Um,
terrains, and it's
the
making
name of the
use of.
piece is Terrain,
Okay.
but it uses the Rabbit Cloud language,
Okay.
which is a
Thank you.
language that's not about rabbits or clouds. It just
Uh-huh.
kind of looks like rabbit and cloud shapes.
Okay.
So don't take that name too seriously in your interpretation of the piece.
Okay.
um, but that language derives from these beautiful rounded shapes in the landscape in Norway. Um, and I wanted people to try to imagine geological time and the processes that created this landscape, and to embody that in sound in some way. So um, I'm working with natural object instruments. So of course, my first thought was, well, the uh, language came from rock, so it should be played on rock.
Okay. Yeah.
But of course, it would be interesting to play it on other instruments as well, to
Mm-hmm.
tap into this concept of geological time on whatever instrument you play. But in terms of playing the rock slabs, and I'm actually in that piece asking people to draw the shape of the calligraphy on the rock. It's as if they're doing I do the calligraphy on the page and you draw the shape on your rock very, very slowly. And we see what that sounds like. And we think about how the different performers would interact with each other in this geologic time world. So for that piece, I did have, I don't know exactly what it will sound like. I don't know what rock you'll pick
Mm-hmm.
or how you'll think about drawing your shape. But I have a sort of an overall textural idea of what it will sound like
Mm-hmm.
because I've played rocks for many years.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Can I show one of the shapes?
sure.
Oops.
Ooh. Oh, it goes the other way.
Goes the other way. Oh, I didn't have enough
Oh no, vertical.
vertical. Oh, I've been playing it wrong all week.
I guess it doesn't really matter. Yeah, it's actually upside down right now.
Oh my God.
So which one did you pick, the top one or the
Um,
bottom one?
I played both on these pages.
Oh,
So I played
cool.
this one and the other one. So,
And so I mean, what was your experience trying to play these shapes really slowly?
um, well, there was the kind of well, there's two parts to it because there's the visual aspect and then there's the sound aspect. So it's kind of like, okay, it was like a fairly large piece of tile with an uneven surface that mimics stone. So I didn't find a slab of stone, but it had pretty good sound. And I got a collection of 5 or 6 different stones that had sharp edges and rounded edges. And so that it created, each stone has its own unique sound, which is fascinating because then you're, okay, now I actually have a palette to work with on the with sounds, and then it's kind of like and exploring the areas of the surface to see how they affect it.
Yeah, because they resonate differently in different
It
parts
resonates
of the
differently,
slab. Yeah.
and but then you're taking the shape and making a shape on this surface. So, and the calligraphy part, it's an eye hand surface motion, right? You have to, there's a physicality of it, which is instrument like because it's like playing an instrument, but you're making an actual visual shape. So I had to imagine this shape that I'm playing and drawing it on this surface and dealing with the contact point.
Yeah.
So it engaged, it's an integration of visuals and audio, which is an area I'm fascinated with anyway. So I was really intrigued by it, because you have to keep your artistic visual sense at the same time that you have your ears open. So yeah, I was I'm going to continue working on the piece because I like that interaction.
And one thing I like about this idea of drawing very slowly is that you have to have this intense focus, right?
Mm-hmm.
Every tiny like little snippet of a movement of your hand affects the sound. So in a way,
Yes.
it's very, for me, when I play something like that, it's almost a very meditative practice, right? To
Mm-hmm.
just be
Yeah.
that intensely focused on something.
Yeah, and going slow, then you get these interruptions. So it caused me to kind of like pause and say, okay, interruptions are going to be okay in this because if you're going slow, there's no way, you know, it would have to be a perfectly smooth surface to move slowly and not have stops in the sound as you're kind of moving along.
Yeah, and it's funny to think about that in terms of where this calligraphy came from, because those shapes in the landscape were made by the glaciers moving over the rocks, right? And slowly grinding them down into these rounded forms. But of course, they get stuck. The glaciers get stuck every so often, and then they kind of
Oh,
chatter on
right.
to the next place they get stuck, and they actually leave scrapes in the stone where they got stuck on a spot, which are called chatter marks. It would kind of like skips along the surface of the rock.
Right. Maybe
And
it's time to show the Norway
the
photo of,
Norway,
yeah.
yeah, I think you need to see
Now that we've kind of set this up, this will be a good,
where that language
yeah.
derived from. Uh, all right, so the glacier calligraphy. Let's go straight to the rabbit cloud because we were just talking about that.
Oh,
So
okay, yeah.
here's the landscape that came from.
Oh, beautiful, yeah.
And to get there, I had to hike 1,000 meters up the side of a fjord, which takes several hours. And you get to the top, and there's these incredible forms, like there's
Mm.
whales laying across the mountainside or something. Um, and I would go up there, and I would find rocks, like a slab of granite that was detached and made good sounds, and I would put my contact microphones on them, and I would look around at the shapes and draw the shapes on the stone slab in situ, like in this environment, and
Mm-hmm.
record that. And that's kind of how I got started with thinking about this as calligraphy, because I actually did it as sound first.
Wow.
So of course I took a lot of photographs because it's an incredible landscape, and I would go back to my studio and start to transfer these shapes from the photograph into lines of calligraphy. I briefly studied Chinese landscape painting many years ago, and
Mm-hmm.
as part of that, we just did a tiny bit of Chinese calligraphy. So I have like a little bit of background. I'm certainly not an expert, but when I started to see these shapes as languages, I was like, oh no, it needs to be some kind of calligraphy. Um, and then, from this really rough, okay, that's kind of a shape that looks like a character, I started fine tuning it into the individual characters that are in that score. And then I've gone on to then think about placing multiple shapes from that language on a page in different forms. But some of those, actually 7 glacier languages that I'm developing. So if you quickly want to see them, they don't all
Yeah.
have names. Here's where this one started. It became that. And this is not thinking of it as a graphic score, but figuring out the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is kind of peacock language from these cracks in a giant granite slab. This one I'm calling birdfoot language. And it's just from the cracks in this one particular place. That one we already talked about. And then the landscape there, when you fly over it, is really interesting. You can see all the places that the joints in the underlying rock fractured. And this was nicely highlighted by the remaining snow when I was there.
Wow.
And so from these aerial photographs, I made these more like pictographic shapes. And then I thought about placing them on a page. And this one ended up looking like runes, maybe some kind of Nordic runes. And then another large form shapes in the cliff, that kind of stuff. And so when I'm thinking about how to place each language on the page and how one might interpret them musically, in these 7 glacial languages, they're all different, right? They're different scales. One is aerial and one is little scratches on a rock. And I think that it's important to factor that into the interpretation somehow.
A very fertile ground for, creating music from.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me it's fascinating because I think all music scores are graphic scores. It's just that there's one that's, the Western notational system has had, 500 years of development with some specific ideas. And so you have a lot of interpretations that are agreed upon over many years about what that all means. And your language is it's at Genesis, so the interpretations are just beginning, of what it could mean. So
yeah, and in some cases, I'm still figuring out what the characters are, right?
Yeah.
So it's really in its infancy. Who knows where it will go?
Yeah, I agree. It'll be fascinating to see what you end up, where it does go.
Well, I'm really curious to see what other musicians do with it.
Yeah.
So thinking about how much instruction to give to someone and how much to just let them figure out on their own.
Yeah, the history of graphic scores and musicians is kind of comes into play here. It's like Xenakis made really intricate graphic scores based on mathematical theorems. But he never presented those scores, the graphic scores, to the musicians. He would create a standard notation representation, a realization they would end up calling it, for the musicians to play, because he was the composer, he wanted this sound. This is where the sound came from with the graphic score, but that's what it was, all the way to Earl Brown creating graphic scores that were just different rectangular shape, filled in lines that the performer had to decide what each of these boxes were. But I think he also assumed that you would figure it out and then present a version of it to, graphic scores that are for improvisers to kind of go with.
And then there's like the Cornelius Cardew,
like Cornelius
with
Cardew,
like no instructions at all.
No instructions at all, and off you go. And and in my work, I often have different versions of them depending on who they are. If I know they're really good improvisers, I just say, let's just play this score. If there's other, if it's a larger group, I give simple instructions just to create, kinds of areas of concern so that the larger ensemble or the musicians have something to hang on to while they're, and then you can kind of get at what the sound is, that, the possibilities. But
are you usually making your scores for a specific performer or ensemble?
No, I make when I'm making scores. I mean, I had a whole period where I walked around and got plant matter and then I used that as the color. Then I took photos of it because plant color doesn't set, right? It fades fairly quickly, so you got to take a picture, and then I would I would photocopy leaves and other natural things and use pen art to make these scores. And sometimes I had a sound idea that I wanted to get at, so I was looking for those things. And the other times I just do the art part of it. And I look at art. I always look at art and say, what suggests sound? Kandinsky was the person that kind of got me started. He has a book called Point to Line to Plane to Sound. And it's a demonstration of all the improvisational graphic languages he has for the paintings that he calls improvisations. And they're based on dance and sound and all this kind of stuff. So I just reversed it. He was making a painting out of it, and I was making music out of it. So that's kind of how I got started with it. So it really is. That's what I mean. It's you have a lot of ways of going for it. I like the other thing I like is it resonates with me to use that word that the performer has to bring themselves to it. The meditative part. That it's saying, like, if you want to have some memory or an emotion or a thought or any of the things that kind of make up who we are, you can bring it to this piece as you're interacting with the visual part making the sound. And that's very appealing to me.
That's a really interesting analogy that I think of, like, when we make work as composers and we specify everything, we're not necessarily letting the player be themselves fully, right? And improvising or having a more improvisational score lets the player be themselves more, as you were saying. And it's kind of like ways that we can interact with the natural world, right? We can try to control it and use it to our own ends, or we can just be within it and work with it. It's more interesting to me right now in this time especially, right, where we're really seeing all the effects of climate change and we have these horrible fires and there's a pandemic, that we have to stop fighting nature, and we have to stop dictating everything ourselves as humans, thinking that we're the most important thing when clearly we're not. And I've come from a background of wanting to be very much in control as the composer, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to let go of that. Just philosophically, it's not really working with what's happening in the world,
Yeah. Sustainability kind of rears its head, It's, the fires, It's like a Smokey the payoff for Smokey the Bear ideas about the forest. No fires. But
so many things, Yeah.
Yeah. Another aspect that fascinates me about this work is the time. You were mentioning this earlier, about that these are glacier time. So you're talking about hundreds of thousands and more, years of, maybe a million years. I mean, I don't know,
millions.
Each geological place that you're looking at has a different time frame of how it was created, So I've been very interested.
Also with the tree. So I also have this oak tree calligraphy, and that's also a different time scale, right? Like It's not as long as geological time, but it's still significantly longer than human time.
Yes. Yeah, the knowledge of what an oak forest knows, what a redwood forest knows, as more study is in seeing that they're interconnected, they are, have relationships as organisms and how they shape the topography and the landscape around them.
Mm-hmm.
It is
I think a lot of the reasons we've gotten ourselves into so much trouble as humans is that we find it very difficult to think about things on time scales other than human time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can start to try to perceive, the long distance, the long-term effects of what we do, it will really help. It's important to be able to look at things from vastly different perspectives.
Yeah, and feel connected to that time. Feel it for inside yourself that you're actually part of this ongoing process that is the earth.
And really, music is a great medium to try to explore that in, because here we are working with sound in time.
Yeah, the performance part of it is that what time is fascinating to me as well, because I'm really interested in the moment that the future becomes the present.
Oh, nice.
Or the present becomes the past, right? There's this, time is not an exact point. There's little bits of the future and a little bit, bunches of the past that are coming up. And so when you're performing, in a way, when you're doing calligraphy, you're trying to get to the point of being as close to feeling the future as you can, right? On the becoming of it. So you basically are always in the past because your consciousness is in the past. Your consciousness is all that you've become. So it's your whole past. And at a certain point, you need to kind of like get beyond you're trying to get a little ahead of your consciousness. And I was having a conversation with Tim Perkis about it, because he was just saying, your subconscious, or the part, is actually more close to the future than your conscious part. Because your subconscious is letting you know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
It's more tuned into your physical environment. It's going to tell you if there's, it's getting really hot, better get out of here, or, you're really cold.
It's the same thing in martial arts. So I've been doing Aikido for 20 something years, which is a martial art where you blend with the attack from your partner. We like to call them partners, not attackers. And when you try to get to a higher level in martial arts, what you need to do is let go of the conscious mind. Same thing with improvising music, right? And you just have to respond with your body, with your muscle memory.
Right.
So you're not slowed down by this process of thinking.
Right.
And that's really hard to get there. It requires years and years of drilling things into your muscle memory. And then you get to a point where you just respond. You don't freak out, you don't panic, you just do the right thing to lead us into the outcome you want, which in Aikido is not hurting your partner or yourself. And I think we do that, we're striving to do that when we improvise as well, right? Like to lead the music somewhere. We don't really know always. But to let go of the conscious mind of thinking, okay, now I've got to like get in my favorite lick here, whatever my favorite sound, but just see what the moment needs and respond appropriately.
Yeah. And there's also the thing of being present in the moment, because you can leave the moment too.
Oh yeah, we do it all the time. We're almost never in the moment, really. Like,
yeah. And along with that, it's like you have this physical sense, but you're also saying, I'm creating a sound, so I have to be attentive to what the sound is, which means I have to have my ears engaged at the time that this is making, and then and then it gets back to having your eyes engaged. So it's a very complicated set of things that you're trying to not be there, but be there. It's it's, I don't know. I find it really interesting.
I think that maybe the Zen koan aspect of the Asian arts I've studied is really worked its way into my music somehow here. Like,
Yeah, if there's the Zen part of it, and then there's the the understanding from the physics, the physics about time. Now, there's this kind of Western approach of looking at it that harkens back to other cultures' way of dealing, understanding it, and then and which is kind of part of what you're looking at too. It's the Western mind that looks at the glaciers and then says these are how these were formed. Where you go into the science of what are the signs, how did it get like this, so the knowledge of that geographical time is written in front of you, and you can understand it without that kind of uh, uh, system of learning that or you can have that the understanding of geology as a science, the Western science of geology, and then you're putting it back in a way. The calligraphy is what puts it back into the individual comprehension and feeling of that.
yeah, and into a physicality.
In the physicality, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have to think about that. I'll have to try to be more like a martial artist when I'm approaching it the next time.
Well, you don't have to. I mean, that's the thing with these, right? Is that you if you're interested, sure, go there. But if you find something else interesting in this concept, then you should explore that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, for me, music making has always been a mind-body activity.
Yeah.
That that you know that dance should be a part of it, and the motion and how you're feeling and how you're moving, right? It's all how it, even if it's very small movements, but you have to have that as the process of making the music to make the music the best it can be. So
Yep. I think the natural object instruments really make you have to face that.
yes.
If you were in denial,
Yeah.
because they're very unforgiving um, if you mess up.
Yeah. So show us some more of the things from the lexicographies and talk about them.
Yeah, we should probably wrap it up soon. Let me show you the oak trees, because we didn't really talk about
Yeah.
keep it brief. Share. So let's see, albums. So the Coast Live Oaks is
Wow.
something that I started getting interested in very recently with the pandemic and the lockdown and being stuck in the city.
Mm-hmm.
I live across the street from Golden Gate Park, and I live in an apartment. I don't even have a backyard really. So I've been spending a lot of time in the park. And I kind of fell in love with these oak trees that are literally across the street from my park, from my house. And I never really paid attention to them before. Having lived here for like 25 years, I just never really focused on the oak trees, and they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? Look at these trees, and they have these incredible forms. And the more time I spent in the park, the more I would go off the main paths and just like sneak through the forest and find these incredible forms that, of course, I immediately thought of as calligraphy. And I just kept taking all these photographs. I was like, oh, I love these oak trees. They're gorgeous. I just want to live here in the park, but not be homeless. And then one day I noticed that there were actually these signs on the trail talking about the oak trees, and they talked about the history of this grove of ancient oak trees. And these coastal live oaks were in this area before Westerners came. Most of the area that is Golden Gate Park now was sand dunes, but right here near my house, there were these chert rocky outcroppings that held enough soil that oak trees could grow there. And so there were these oaks, and the acorns from the oaks were food for the Native Americans that lived here. And then we
So
had
this is a natural oak grove. This wasn't planted as
this
part of the
was
park.
not planted. The story
Wow.
gets even more interesting though, right? So then we had the earthquake, the big earthquake in San Francisco. Most of it burned down, right? And there were these tent encampments of people living in this area, and they cut down most of the oak trees and used them for firewood.
In 1906.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
But the oak trees resprouted from the same roots and grew up again. And these are the trees that we see now. So in a way, they're still those same oak trees. They came from the same roots. They didn't grow from seeds. They're just, the trees grew back.
They grew back.
They grew back.
Wow. Well,
And
that's
so I just think that's just such a wonderful story of
fantastic.
regrowth, and especially in this kind of horrible time, to see some hope in these oak trees.
Yeah, maybe these oaks will, the ones that have burned in these coastal fires, they'll grow back.
Maybe I'm not an expert on oak trees, but I'm learning.
Yeah, I've seen in the drives through the Vaca Mountains where there's been burns. You see quite a few trees and shrubs and stuff that are growing back from the root systems. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
Well.
And so it inspires me to think about, how can we grow into something new and better from these really difficult times? So anyway, back to the mundane calligraphy.
Yeah.
I would take these photographs and then I would sketch out little ideas of what looked like characters, and then they became figuring out calligraphy. I'm still in the process of doing this. I have more photographs to make up characters from, but I started playing around with the ones I have, and then thinking about placing them on the page and how that could reflect the shape of an oak, or the idea of growth, or a landscape that oak trees were tucked into. Something like this, I'm thinking more about looking up through the branches, like being under an umbrella of these incredible shapes. And then playing with size.
Yeah. That's really beautiful. It's very evocative. I mean, branches to me are the structure for capturing light, right? Because the branches exist to get the leaves to the right place for that spot to get the light for the plant.
It's true. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's beautiful. I really think it's an amazing thing you've come up with here. And just the idea, I've said it before, but the fact that you're creating a language without the concept of what it means. I mean, there's some inherent meaning from where it was derived from, but it's not like, I need a word for cow.
I don't think I'm necessarily making a language. I don't want to map this to words or like middle C or something. But it's more like to evoke the feeling, I guess, and I'm still working it out.
Yeah, but that's a form of content.
Suggest something.
Yeah, but you want people to put content to the shapes, right?
I do, but I don't necessarily want it to be mapped specifically.
Yes.
In a language.
It's not right. Yeah. It's not gonna. This shape is a cow is not the idea. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I guess we should wrap it up. I guess we should mention again that it's September 24th at 7:30 online for this event. I guess we don't have to mention it since.
Yeah, I think they're going to mention that. I mean, that's when this is screening, right?
Right. So they'll have to cut this off. But I'm confused. I guess you can walk by the gallery and see the scores, or will they let people in small numbers to come and see the work? Do you
I
know?
think you might, I don't know, we'll have to ask David, but you definitely can see it through the window. So
You
if you
can see it
happen
through the
to
window.
be in
Yeah.
that neighborhood, I mean, it's the window gallery, giant
So,
windows. So
right,
you can see it from outside if you don't want to hazard getting in.
right. 55 Taylor Street, San Francisco is the
Walk on by and
walk
think
on
about
by.
some glaciers and some ancient oak trees.
Great. Uh, anyway, I guess thank you for allowing me to interview you.
Oh,
And
thank you for the very interesting conversation.
yes, yes, and I'm looking forward to coming and seeing the installation.
Thank you.